& Schuster Audio presents Silent Night, a novel by Mary Higgins Clark. Read by Jennifer-Beals.
Saint Christopher, patron of travelers, pray for us and protect us from evil. It was Christmas Eve in New York City. The cab made its way slowly down Fifth Avenue. It was nearly 5 o'clock. The traffic was heavy and the sidewalks were jammed with last-minute Christmas shoppers and tourists anxious to glimpse the elaborately trimmed store windows and the fabled Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. Catherine Dornan sat bolt upright in the back of the cab, her arms around the shoulders of her 2 small sons. By the rigidity she felt in their bodies, she knew her mother had been right. 10-year-old Michael's surliness and 7-year-old Brian's silence were sure signs that both boys were intensely worried about their dad. They had come to New York City from Omaha for Tom Dornan's surgery. Earlier that afternoon, she had called her mother from the hospital, still sobbing despite the fact that Spence Crawley, her husband's best friend and doctor, assured her that Tom had come through the operation better than expected. Spencer had even suggested that the boys visit their father at 7 o'clock that night. Catherine's mother had spoken to her firmly. "You've got to pull yourself together. The boys are upset and you're not helping. I think it would be good to divert them for a little while. Take them down to Rockefeller Center to see the tree, then to dinner. Seeing you so worried has practically convinced them that Tom will die." Catherine knew her mother was right. But this isn't supposed to be happening, she thought. Lean, athletic 38-year-old men don't collapse while making their hospital rounds. And Dr. Tom Dornan always joked that pediatricians had birthright immunization to all the viruses and germs that arrived with their patients. But Tom didn't have immunization from the leukemia that necessitated immediate removal of his grossly enlarged spleen. At the hospital they told her that he must have been ignoring warning signs for months. And I was too stupid to notice, Catherine thought as she tried to keep her lip from quivering. The cab pulled over to the curb. Catherine pulled out her wallet. Michael watched as his mother peeled a $5 bill from the large wad of cash. "How come you have so much money, Mom?" "When Dad was admitted to the hospital yesterday, they made me take everything he had in his billfold." She followed Michael out onto the sidewalk and held the door open for Brian. They were in front of Saks, near the corner of 49th Street and 5th Avenue. Orderly lines of spectators were patiently waiting to get a close-up look at the Christmas window display. Catherine steered her sons to the back of the line. "Let's see the windows, then we'll go across the street and get a better look at the tree." Brian sighed heavily. This was some Christmas. He hated standing in line. For anything. He could hardly wait to see his dad, to give him the present his grandmother had said would make him well. When it was finally their turn to get up close to the windows, Brian moved quickly, barely noticing the scenes of whirling snowflakes and dolls and elves and animals dancing and singing. He was glad when they finally were off the line. Then, as they started to make their way to the corner to cross the avenue, he saw that a guy with a violin was about to start playing and people were gathering around him. The air suddenly was filled with the sound of Silent Night, and people began singing. Catherine turned back from the curb. "Wait, boys. Let's listen for a few minutes." Brian could hear the catch in her throat and knew that she was trying not to cry. He'd hardly ever seen Mom cry until 10 days ago, when someone phoned from the hospital and said Dad was real sick. Callie Hunter walked slowly down 5th Avenue. It was nearly 5:30, and she was surrounded by crowds of last-minute shoppers, their arms filled with packages. There was a time when she might have shared their excitement, But today, all she felt was achingly tired. Work had been so difficult. During the Christmas holidays, people wanted to be home, so most of the patients in the hospital had been either depressed or difficult. Their bleak expressions reminded her vividly of her own depression over the last 2 Christmases, both of them spent in the Bedford Correctional Facility for women. She passed St. Patrick's Cathedral, hesitating only a moment as a memory came back to her of her grandmother taking her and her brother Jimmy there to see the creche. But that was 20 years ago. She had been 10 and he 6. She wished she could go back to that time, change things, keep the bad things from happening, keep Jimmy from becoming what he was now. Even to think her brother's name was enough to send waves of fear coursing through her body. Dear God, make him leave me alone, she prayed. Early this morning, with Gigi clinging to her, she had answered the angry pounding on her door to find Detective Shore and another officer who said he was Detective Levy standing in the dingy hallway of her apartment building on East 10th Street and Avenue B. "Callie, you covering for your brother again?" The detective's question was Callie's first indication that Jimmy Sidens had escaped from Rikers Island prison. Shore glared at her. "This time the charge is attempted murder of a prison guard. Your brother shot him and took his uniform. The officer is in critical condition, so you'll spend a lot more than 15 months in jail if you help Jimmy again. I don't have to remind you that you're still on probation. This time they'll throw the book at you." She'd spoken quietly. "I've never forgiven myself for helping Jimmy last time, and I didn't know what he'd done before." Their eyes shifted past her, searching the room behind her for signs of his presence. "Look around. He isn't here. And if you want to put a tap on my phone, do that too. I want you to hear me tell Jimmy to turn himself in, because that's all I'd have to say to him." "But surely Jimmy won't find me," Callie prayed as she threaded her way through the crowd of shoppers and sightseers. Not this time. After she had served her prison sentence, she reclaimed Gigi from the foster home. The social worker had located the tiny apartment on East 10th Street and gotten her the job as a nurse's aide at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital. This would be her first Christmas with Gigi in 2 years. If only she had been able to afford a few decent presents for her, she thought. A 4-year-old kid should have her own new doll's carriage, not the battered hand-me-down Callie'd been forced to get for her. The coverlet and pillow she had bought wouldn't hide the shabbiness of the carriage. But maybe she could find the guy who was selling dolls on the street around here last week. They were only $8, and she remembered that there was even one that looked like Gigi. She hadn't had enough money with her that day, but the guy had said he'd be near Saks on Christmas Eve, so she had to find him. Oh God, she prayed, let them arrest Jimmy before he hurts anyone else. There's something wrong with him. There always has been. Ahead of her, people were singing Silent Night. As she got closer, she realized that they weren't carolers, just a crowd around a street violinist who was playing Christmas tunes. Holy Infant, so tender and mild. Brian did not join in the singing, even though Silent Night was his favorite, and at home in Omaha he was a member of his church's children's choir. He wished he were there now and not New York. He jammed his hands in the pockets of his jacket. He didn't want to listen to the guy playing the violin, and he didn't feel like standing here. They were wasting time. He wanted to get to the hospital and watch Mom give Dad the big St. Christopher medal that had saved Grandpa's life when he was a soldier in World War II. Grandpa had worn it all through the war, and it even had a dent in it where a bullet had hit it. Gran had asked Mom to give it to Dad to wear, and Mom had almost laughed. Oh, Mother, Christopher was only a myth. He's not considered a saint anymore, and the only people he helped were the ones who sold the medals everybody used to stick on their dashboards. But Gran had told her, Catherine, your father believed it helped him get through some terrible battles, and that is all that matters. He believed, and so do I. Please give it to Tom, and have faith. Brian felt impatient with his mother. If Gran believed that Dad was going to get better if he got the medal, then his mom had to give it to him. He was positive Gran was right. Sleep in heavenly peace. The violin stopped playing, and a woman who had been leading the singing held out a basket. Brian watched as people began to drop coins and dollar bills into it. Once again his mother pulled her wallet out and extracted 2 $1 bills. "Michael, Brian, here. Put these in the basket." Michael grabbed his dollar and tried to push his way through the crowd. Brian started to follow him. Then he noticed that his mother's wallet hadn't gone all the way down into her shoulder bag when she had put it back. As he watched, he saw the wallet fall to the ground. Brian turned back to retrieve it, but before he could pick it up, a hand reached down and grabbed it. He saw that the hand belonged to a thin woman with a dark raincoat and a long ponytail. "Mom?" But everyone was singing again, and Catherine didn't turn her head. The woman who had taken the wallet began to slip through the crowd. Instinctively, Brian began to follow her, afraid to lose sight of her. He turned back to call out to his mother again, but she was singing along now too. For an instant, Brian hesitated as he glanced over his shoulder at his mother. Should he run back and get her? But he thought again about the medal that would make his father better. It was in the wallet, and he couldn't let it get stolen. The woman was already turning the corner. He raced to catch up with her. "Why'd I pick up the wallet?" Callie thought frantically. "You know it probably belonged to that woman with the little boys. It was on the ground next to her." The wallet felt like a hot brick in her pocket. In her mind, Callie replayed the moment when she first noticed the slim young woman in the rose-colored all-weather coat. She could see the coat was fur-lined from the turned-back sleeves. It obviously was expensive, as were the woman's shoulder bag and boots. The dark hair that came to the collar of her coat was shiny. She didn't look like she could have a care in the world. Callie had thought, "I wished I looked like that. She's about my age and my size, and we have almost the same color hair. Well, maybe by next year I can afford pretty clothes for Gigi and me." Then, as she passed the woman, she'd felt her foot kick something, and she looked down and seen the wallet lying there. "Why didn't I just ask if it was hers?" Callie agonized. But in that instant, she'd remembered how years ago her grandmother had come home one day, embarrassed and upset. She had found a wallet on the street and opened it and saw the name and address of the owner. She'd walked several blocks to return it, even though her arthritis was so bad that every step was painful. The woman who owned it had looked through it and said that a $20 bill was missing. Grandmother had been terribly upset. She felt that the woman had practically accused her of being a thief. That memory had flooded Callie the minute she touched the wallet. Suppose it did belong to the lady in the rose coat, and she thought Callie had picked her pocket or taken money out of it. Suppose a policeman was called. They'd find out she was on probation. They wouldn't believe her any more than they'd believed her when she lent Jimmy money and her car because he'd told her if he didn't get out of town right away, a guy in another street gang was going to kill him. Oh God, why didn't I just leave the wallet there? Callie tried to reassure herself that if she hadn't picked it up, it would have just lain there and someone else would have taken it. She considered tossing it in the nearest mailbox. She couldn't risk that. There were too many undercover cops around Midtown during the holidays. Suppose one of them saw her and asked what she was doing. No, she'd get home right away. Ika Banks, who minded Gigi along with her own grandchildren after the daycare center closed, would be bringing her home. It was getting late. I'll put it in an envelope, addressed to whosever name is in it, and drop it in the mailbox later, Callie decided. That's all I can do. Callie reached Grand Central Station. It was mobbed with people rushing in all directions, hurrying home for Christmas. She shouldered her way across the main terminal, finally making it down the steps to the Lexington Avenue subway. As she dropped a token in the slot and hurried for the train, she was unaware of the small boy who had slipped under a turnstile and was dogging her footsteps. The familiar words, "God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay," seemed to taunt Catherine, reminding her of the forces that threatened the happily complacent life she had assumed would be hers forever. She could not escape the fear that her husband was not going to live, and the thought of life without him was almost paralyzing. Michael returned from dropping the dollar in the singer's basket. "Mom, where's Brian?" Startled from her thoughts, Catherine looked around for her son. "Didn't he go with you to the singer?" "No, he probably kept the dollar instead. He's a dork." "Michael, stop it." Catherine looked around, suddenly alarmed. "Brian? Brian?" The carol was over, the crowd dispersing. A few people turned and looked at her curiously. "A little boy. He's wearing a dark blue ski jacket and a red cap. Did anyone see where he went?" She watched as heads shook, as eyes looked around, wanting but unable to help. Catherine knew that something was terribly wrong. She felt the tears that now came so easily rising behind her eyes. She fumbled in her bag for a handkerchief and realized something was missing, the familiar bulk of her wallet. "Oh my God, my wallet's gone." Michael lost his surly look and suddenly became a scared 10-year-old. Catherine felt that her legs were turning to rubber. "Call the police! My little boy is missing!" Brian was having trouble keeping up with the woman who had his mom's wallet. The subway car was so crowded he could hardly get in. The woman was standing, hanging onto a bar that ran over the seats along the side. Brian stood near her, his eyes fixed on her ponytail and dark raincoat. They went only one long stop, then she pushed her way to the opening doors. So many people were in Brian's way that he almost didn't get out of the subway car in time, and then had to hurry to catch up with her. They emerged on a busy corner. Buses raced past in both directions, rushing to get across the wide street before the light turned red. This street sign said 14th. Brian wished a cop would come along so he could ask for help, but he didn't see one anywhere. He knew what he was going to do anyway. He would follow the lady to where she lived. He still had the dollar his mother had given him. He would get change and call his grandmother, and she'd send a cop who would get his mom's wallet back. It's a good plan, he thought to himself. In fact, he was sure of it. He had to get the wallet and the medal that was inside. The street they were on now wasn't bright for the first time. Brian felt scared. Some places were boarded up, and there was a lot of writing on the buildings, and some of the street lights were broken. He was out of breath trying to keep up with the lady. How far was she going, he wondered. 2 blocks later, he had his answer. She stopped at the entrance to an old building, stuck her key in the door, and went inside. Brian raced to catch the door before it closed behind her. The hall was dark and dirty. The smell of stale food hung in the air. Ahead of him, he could hear footsteps going up the stairs. Gulping to swallow his fear and trying not to make noise, Brian slowly began to climb to the first landing. He would see where the lady went, then he would get out of there and find a telephone. Maybe instead of calling Gran, he would dial 911. His mom had taught him that that was what he should do when he really needed help. Which, so far, he didn't. Catherine and Michael were sitting in a squad car parked in front of Saks, near the spot where the violinist had been playing. The police officer in charge, Manuel Ortiz, spoke to them soothingly. "All right, Mrs. Dornan. Describe your son to me." "He's 7 and small for his age." "What color hair?" Michael clutched his mother's hand reassuringly as he answered. "Like mine, kind of reddish. His eyes are blue. He's got freckles, and one of his front teeth is missing. He has the same kind of pants I'm wearing, and his jacket is like mine except it's blue and mine's green. He's skinny." "You're a real help, son. Now, ma'am, you say your wallet is missing. Do you think you might have dropped it, or it could have been a pickpocket?" "I don't know. I gave the boys money for the violinist. I probably didn't push it down far enough in my purse. It was quite bulky and might have just fallen out." "Ma'am, do you want to call your husband?" "My husband is in Sloan Kettering Hospital. He's very ill. In fact, he's expecting us. He'll be wondering where we are." Manuel Ortiz had been a policeman only a year, but already he had come in contact with grief and despair many times. He saw both in the eyes of this young woman. She had a husband who was very sick, now a missing kid. "Mrs. Dornan, I'm going to get Brian's description out right now. In 3 minutes, every cop in Manhattan is going to be on the lookout for him." Why don't you leave Michael with us? We'll stay here in case Brian tries to make his way back. I'll get another car to take you up to the hospital and wait for you. Officer, you'll stay right here in case Brian comes back? Absolutely. Michael, will you keep your eyes peeled for Brian? Sure, Mom. I'll watch out for the door. Don't call him. Then Catherine saw the look on her son's face. He is trying to get a rise out of me, she thought. He's trying to convince me that Brian is fine, that he'll be fine. She put her arms around Michael and felt his small, gruff embrace return. Jimmy Seidens cursed silently as he walked through the oval near Avenue B in the Stuyvesant Town apartment complex. The uniform he had stripped from the prison guard gave him a respectable look, but it was much too dangerous to wear on the street. He'd managed to lift a filthy overcoat and knit cap from a homeless guy's shopping cart. They helped some, but he had to find something else to wear, something decent. He also needed a car. Nothing fancy, but one that wouldn't be missed until morning. So far, he hadn't found the right one. He was cold and getting hungry. 10 hours in the car, he told himself. Then I'll be in Canada and Paige will meet me there and we'll disappear again. She was the first real girlfriend he'd ever had, and she'd been a big help to him in Detroit. He knew he never would have been caught last summer if he had cased that gas station in Detroit better. He should have known enough to check the John outside the office instead of letting himself be surprised by an off-duty cop who stepped out of it while he was holding a gun on the attendant. The next day he was on his way back to New York to face trial for killing a cop. An older couple passed him and threw a smile in his direction. Jimmy responded with a courteous nod. He paid close attention when he heard the woman speak. Ed, I can't believe you didn't put the presents for the children in the trunk. Who leaves anything inside in a car overnight in this day and age? Jimmy went around the corner and then stepped into the deep shadows on the grass as he returned to watch the couple stop in front of a dark-colored Toyota. The man opened the door. From the back seat he took a small rocking horse and handed it to the woman, then scooped up half a dozen brightly wrapped packages. With her help, he transferred everything to the trunk, relocked the car, and got back on the sidewalk. Jimmy listened carefully as the woman continued. I can't wait to see Bobby's face tomorrow when he opens everything. Ed, will the phone be all right in the glove compartment? Sure, it's a waste of money as far as I'm concerned. Jimmy watched as they turned the corner and disappeared. As he straightened up, he cursed under his breath when he saw the car's bumper sticker. It read, "We're spending our grandchildren's inheritance." It was too damn noticeable. He waited 10 minutes before he walked to the car. As he pulled off most of the distinctive sticker, a few snowflakes swirled around him. 2 minutes later, he was driving out of the complex. It was 5:15. He was headed to Callie's apartment on 10th and B. He knew she'd be surprised to see him, and none too happy. She probably thought he couldn't find her. Why would she suppose that he didn't have a way to keep track of her from Rikers Island? He'd have to be careful. He was sure the cops would be watching for him around Callie's building, but he had that figured out too. He used to hang around this neighborhood and knew how to get across roofs from the other end of the block and into the building. A couple of times he'd even pulled a job there when he was a kid. Knowing Callie, he was sure she still kept some of Frank's clothes in the closet. She'd been crazy about him, probably still had pictures of him all over the place. You'd never think her husband had died before Gigi was even born. And knowing Callie, he figured she'd have at least a few bucks that would get him through the tolls. He'd find a way to keep her mouth shut until he was safely in Canada with Paige. Paige. An image of her floated through his mind. Luscious, blonde, only 22, crazy about him. She'd arranged everything, gotten the gun smuggled into him. She'd never let him down or turn her back on him. Not like his big sister who hadn't come to see him once in Rikers. He hadn't even heard from her. Jimmy's smile was unpleasant. You never tried to help me while I was rotting in Rikers Island, he thought. But once again, Callie, you're going to help me get away. Like it or not. 15 minutes later, Jimmy had picked the flimsy lock of Callie's apartment and was inside. Some dump, he thought, as he took in the cracks in the ceiling and the worn linoleum in the tiny entranceway. But neat, Callie was always neat. A Christmas tree in the corner of what passed for a living room had a couple of small, brightly wrapped packages under it. Jimmy shrugged and went into the bedroom, where he ransacked the closet to find the clothes he knew would be there. After changing, he went through the place looking for money, but found none. He sat on the couch, his eyes riveted on the front door, his nerves jangling. "Come on, Callie," he thought. "Where the hell are you?" At 10 to 6, he heard the key inserted in the lock. He jumped up and in 3 long strides was in the entryway, flattened against the wall. He waited until Callie stepped in and closed the door behind her, then put his hand over her mouth. "Don't scream." He muffled her terrified moan with his palm. "Where's Gigi? Why isn't she with you?" He released his grip long enough to let her answer. "She's at the babysitter's." "How much money have you got?" "Here, take my pocketbook." Callie held it out to him, praying that he would not think to look through her coat pockets. "Oh, God," she thought, "make him go away." "Callie, I'm going to let go of you. Don't try anything or Gigi won't have a mommy waiting for her. You understand that?" Yes. Callie waited until he released his grip on her, then slowly turned to face him. She hadn't seen her brother in 3 years. He looks about the same, she thought, except his eyes held no trace of the occasional warmth that at one time made her hope there was a possibility he might someday straighten out. There was nothing left of the frightened 6-year-old who had clung to her when their parents dumped them with Grandma and disappeared from their lives. He opened her billfold. $18, is that all? "Jimmy, I don't get paid till the day after tomorrow. Please just take it and get out of here." There's half a tank of gas in the car, Jimmy thought. There's money here for another half tank in the tolls. I might just be able to make Canada. He'd have to shut Callie up, of course, but that should be easy enough. He would just warn her that if she put the cops onto him and he got caught, he'd swear that she was the one who arranged for the smuggled gun that he'd used on the guard. Suddenly, a sound from outside made him whirl around. With a menacing gesture to Callie, he noiselessly turned the knob and opened the door just in time to see a small boy darting for the staircase. In one quick movement, Jimmy swooped up the child, covered his mouth, and pulled him inside. As he flung the door closed, he roughly released the boy. "Callie, who is this?" "I don't know who he is. I never seen him before." Brian was so scared he could hardly talk, but he wasn't so scared that he couldn't see that the man and woman were mad at each other. Maybe the man would help him get his mother's wallet back, he thought. He pointed to Callie. "She has my mom's wallet. I saw her pick it up and I followed her because I have to get it back." A wide grin appeared on Jimmy's face. "Well now, that's good news."